Hello, everyone. Welcome to Promethean Action's live question and answer show. My name is Adam Sturman, and I am joined today with Susan Kokinda and Barbara Boyd of Promethean PAC and Promethean Action. And I'd like to thank everyone here for joining us. I sent out an email on Tuesday, so let me just say I apologize for sending out that email. I was kind of busy with other things throughout the day, and I didn't realize that Trump had already signaled that he had signed a ceasefire. I learned that just a few minutes after, as usual, I learned that a few minutes after I had sent the email, but I figured Susan would correct my error, which she did. So we definitely know we have a ceasefire going on right now. What I want to do is just go over some of what Trump has discussed on his Truth Social, just to kind of set the stage for today's show. So just 2 hours ago, this is one of the storylines that has popped up over the last 24 to 48 hours. Once again, Trump is definitely talking about pulling out of NATO. There's no two ways about it. Just 2 hours ago, none of these people, including our own very disappointing NATO, understood anything unless they have pressure placed upon them. And he had other, and this is the one that the email that I sent this morning. This is the one that I think is the important one here, is that this is still a tentative ceasefire. All U.S. ships, aircraft, military personnel with additional ammunition, weaponry, and anything else that is appropriate and necessary for lethal prosecution and destruction of an already substantial degraded enemy will remain in place and around Iran until such time as the real agreement reached is fully complied with. If for any reason it is not, which is highly unlikely, then the shooting starts, bigger and better and stronger than anyone has ever seen before. It was agreed a long time ago, and despite all the fake rhetoric and to the contrary, no nuclear weapons. And the Strait of Hormuz will be open and safe. In the meantime, our great military is loading up, resting, looking forward actually to its next conquest. America is back. And then right before that, this is the other major storyline. You have this other talk about these 10-point plans, right? And these other back channel negotiations. Lindsey Graham was talking about, oh, we need to do we have some congressional investigations into this, right? So here's the other major storyline. The failing New York Times and fake news CNN each reported a totally fake 10-point plan on the Iran negotiations, which was meant to discredit the people involved in the peace process. All 10 points were a made-up hoax. Evil losers, MAGA. So thank you, everyone. As you're joining us, please drop us a like. Everyone on x.com, thank you for tuning in. Please give us a share. Let us know where you're chatting in from. Barbara, your thoughts?
Well, if you read the media right now or go on social media, you're going to be met with a deluge of pure crap. I mean, I hate to say the word, that may be offensive to some people, but that's what it is. It is all coming from the perception management machine of the modern British Empire, Chatham House. Trump really lost the war. Iran won the war. That is British intelligence talking, all right? And that's what the media has been told to reinforce, including many of the social media influencers. What happened here is absolutely clear to me and to anybody who's been watching this administration ever since it came into office. What we're doing, Trump calls it energy dominance. The most important weapon right now in world politics, energy dominance. And, you know, what will happen here is very clear. If Iran doesn't open up the strait, the United States is going to take the strait, pure and simple, and ships will be escorted through. Basically what's going on in terms of the NATO business is Mark Rutte was told yesterday, if NATO doesn't get its ass in gear and put resources into opening the strait, accompanying the United States, we're leaving, pure and simple. We're not going to support you anymore. It's the end of your nonsensical existence. And that's the way Trump has always viewed it. So for clarity, I'd like to just have Adam play what J.D. Vance said yesterday in Budapest. Coming off of Susan's video, you understand he went there and made tremendous speeches in support of Viktor Orban, and the idea that defending Western civilization is really the center of everything Donald Trump is doing. So let's listen to JD actually talk about what actually is happening with these negotiations at this point. And then I want to add something which will surprise many people.
I have the opportunity now to ask you about Iran. There are latest developments, I think very positive developments during the night that we received, that there is a ceasefire. What can we know more about the latest developments in the Middle East?
Yes, that's why I was a little late this morning. I was up very late last night and talking about that. Look, I do think there are good developments here. And let me just say a few things. First of all, what the president set out to do was decimate the Iranian military, decimate their ability to wage conventional war. And that military objective, as the president said yesterday, as I said yesterday, has been achieved. And because of that, what the president did is he basically issued an ultimatum to the Iranians. He said, open up the straits, stop trying to hold the world's economy hostage, and we'll engage in a ceasefire. And that's exactly the agreement that we came to last night. The Iranians have agreed to open up the straits. The United States has agreed to stop attacking. And not just the United States, but also our allies have agreed to stop attacking. And that is the basis of this fragile truce that we have, which is now 8 to 12 hours old. Now, here's what I'll say about this. I've learned a lot about the Iranian system and a lot about the way the Iranians negotiate, because the president told me last night the Iranians are better negotiators than they are fighters. I'm sure they don't like to hear that, but it's true. But here's a couple things. So one, just in the response that we've seen from various segments of Iran, you have on the one hand people within Iran who have responded very favorably. The foreign minister who said, look, we agreed to the United States' terms. We'll do a ceasefire, we'll do a negotiation, we'll open the Straits of Hormuz, and then we'll see if we can come to more agreement down the road. So some of the people have responded favorably and have said the right things. And then you have some people on social media within their system who are basically lying about what we've accomplished militarily. They're lying about the nature of the agreement. They're lying about the nature of the ceasefire. And so you have just, even within their system, and this is why I say this is a fragile truce, you have people who clearly want to come to the negotiating table and work with us to find a good deal. And then you have people who are lying about even the fragile truce that we've already struck. And that's just an interesting thing about their system. And the final point that I'll say about this is the President of the United States has told me, and he's told the entire negotiating team, the Secretary of State, the Special Envoy, Steve Witkoff, he said, go and work in good faith to come to an agreement. That is what he has told us to do. If the Iranians are willing in good faith to work with us, I think we can make an agreement. If they're going to lie, if they're going to cheat, if they're going to try to prevent even the fragile truce that we've set up from taking place, then they're not going to be happy. Because what the president has also shown is that we still have clear military, diplomatic, and maybe most importantly, we have extraordinary economic leverage. So the president has told us not to use those tools. He's told us to come to the negotiating table. But if the Iranians don't do the exact same thing, they're going to find out that the president of the United States is not one to mess around. He's impatient. He's impatient to make progress. He has told us to negotiate in good faith. And I think if they negotiate in good faith, we will be able to find a deal. But that's a big if. And ultimately, it's up to the Iranians how they negotiate. I hope they make the right decision.
So that's the actual situation, folks. Everything you're seeing in the media, which is garbage, has one of two strategic imperatives attached to it. One, coming from our former allies, is the strategic defeat of the United States, if possible. Second, coming from their allies inside the United States, namely the Democratic Party, they're going to basically dump all over the administration, act as traitors, which they're actually acting as. They're basically begging the United States military to lose the war. They're calling on people to refuse the president's orders. That's treasonous. It's sedition in a time of war. Don't expect anything relieving that. It's a question of whether the population is smart enough to actually rise to the occasion. And that's our task here at Promethean Action. Now, surprising, and what most people don't see, is the role of China in actually bringing all of this about. The president recognized it. He said, yes, they did play a significant part here. They're putting and exerting major pressure on Iran right now. That is part and parcel of the economic tools which J.D. Vance was referring to. The other economic tools, of course, exist within the framework of the same thing that happened in the Suez Crisis way back in 1956. We can essentially pull the plug on much of the present British-oriented financial system at this point if we want to. And they know that. You've got a big, massive exposure of all of these, asset holdings in private credit at this point, which could blow up. And a lot of that is held by companies which, have not exactly been on the president's side at this point in terms of the economic reorganization of the United States. So it is a big battle because we're fighting the empire which has controlled us ever since the end of World War II, when we basically fell for a British ploy, saying that if we didn't get involved as taking over the British Empire, which is what Churchill actually sold to the Truman at that point, then the entire world was going to fall to communism, and therefore we had to act in that role. Now Trump is transforming that role into something very, very, very different, i.e. an alliance based on economic development and peace. But to have the peace, you've got to get rid of the controlled terrorists, which still exist in the Middle East and elsewhere. And every terrorism operation is really a state-controlled operation. It's not some indigenous group out there deciding, well, I'm radicalized and I'm going to become terrorist, although that can happen clearly with the internet in the United States at this point, which is a different kind of factor in the equation. But you got to watch out, because this war is primarily a war of perception management. The Iranians are very, very good at it. They've snookered a whole lot of people who, basically think that Israel is the new Satan, as opposed to the actual empire, into kind of a binary world of choice. You're either pro-Arab and pro-Muslim, or you're anti-Muslim, pro-Israel, or you're basically in that framework, which is the Middle East religious warfare framework, which they've now exported successfully, I would add, to several social media influencers in the United States, Tucker Carlson among them, and have got you all sort of, tethered up and emotional about all these two choices, okay, when the real choice is between the American system and the British system, period. End of story. Myself, on Sunday, when we were, having the Trump is about to blow up the world, kind of hand wringing and going on and all that other stuff, I actually said to myself, I got to get out of this stuff. I can't possibly write. I'm too emotional. And I went and listened, as appropriate for Easter, to Bach playing St. Matthew's Passion. I suggest that for people in this period. It really is important to do something completely outside your normal kind of working idea of things, which is deep, classical, and draws on the best sense of human beings. So that's how I'd end our intro.
Thank you, Barbara. Susan, yes.
Yeah, let me build on that by going back. Andrew, a little way back in the chat, made the point that J.D. Vance introduced me to a new word, nihilism. And I think that's extremely important, because when you go the next step in terms of the British system versus the American system, what you're really dealing with are two fundamentally different set of principles. The one which underscores Western civilization and the great monotheistic religions, which starts with a very simple premise. There is a single creator. He has created the universe with universal principles, and he set us above the beast so that we could discover those principles and we could act on them, and we could improve our dominion over nature and continue God's great creation. The word nihilism, which J.D. Vance used in one of his speeches in Budapest, basically denies any universal principles, says that the world is based on chaos. You have no power over it. We're just, other animals bouncing around in this chaos. And clearly that world is then ruled by power, influence, force, and arbitrariness. I mean, that's really the most fundamental question of nihilism, which is this question of arbitrariness, which is when people feel completely impotent and angry and hopeless and fall into whatever form of hedonism or self-destructiveness or outward destructiveness that they do. I think it's extremely important to start with that, because what we are fighting, this is principalities, powers, and evil in high places, because that really defines the nature of this fight. What this administration is fighting, what Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, what they are fighting is this empire based on nihilism, a very anti-human conception, and the way that it has permeated many nations, many institutions, and many structures. And I think it's important what JD said in that clip that we just showed. You have different factions. I mean, people talk about Iran as if it's like a monolith. It isn't. You have an empire controlled or created, I don't know how much controlled they are, nihilist faction, which is what has been holding the world hostage since, for the last 40 years, since the Ayatollahs came in. And then you have the people of Iran. You have other people, I'm sure, in the leadership who have had to capitulate to this nihilist faction. And I'm going to keep using that word because I think it's very appropriate. But who, given another option, which is the overwhelming show of force that the United States has demonstrated, want to do something else, but can only do that if the United States continues to make clear we have the overwhelming power to crush this nihilist force in the world. Now, it's obviously not the only place it is, but it's one of the principal remaining points of control of this British imperial system. So, as Barbara said, get away from these binary choices of pro-Israel, anti-Israel, whatever binary, Democrat, Republican, left, right, whatever binary you're in, just take a step back and make sure that you're thinking from the standpoint of this fundamental question of principle, which is what's being fought out before us right now.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you to everyone who's joining us today, both in YouTube and X.com. Let me do some quick shout outs here and thank all of our audience for joining us every week. Melody, thank you thank you for joining us every week. And a super big shout out again to Mark. Thank you, Mark. I think I answered your question from last week. We finally connected. I haven't heard back from you. If you have any more questions, please just reply on that thread and I should get it. We're getting a lot more than we voted for, folks. Things are getting fixed that we didn't even know were broken. And Trump is doing it from a 40,000-foot level. It makes me hopeful. God bless the work you do. Thank you. Thank you, Mark. And thank you very much for joining us. We couldn't do any of this without your support. I hope you're on our midterm boot camp. Thank you for coming here. All right. I have some other people, random chance, good morning. I think we should just remove all these countries that refuse to help from NATO and add new allied nations. What do you all think of that?
Well, I think Trump is much more transactional in terms of these alliances, okay? He wants to see what can we do for each other. That's his fundamental negotiating principle. You know, he basically looks at a country and he says, as in any deal, and people should really read The Art of the Deal, all right, who are confused about his language, confused about what he's doing, etc. It's a way of doing deals that he learned in the vicious market of New York real estate, which is probably more snaky and more violent than anything he's encountering among these various nations. All right. It is a knife wielding, in a literal sense, world of negotiation. And how you negotiate to come out of it on top is a learned task. And that's what The Art of the Deal is actually all about. So his idea is transactional between nations. What we do is he says, prepare endlessly. Learn everything you can about a country. It's completely antithetical to everything that's said about Trump, all right? Just take a huge amount of information in and figure out what does that country want above all else, because that's what's going to be driving negotiations from their side. What's really important to them, all right? What's really important to the other side of the negotiation. And you prepare way, way, way ahead of time before you engage. He looks at warfare or the military battle as actually being a failure in some respect of negotiation. All right, that's what people don't understand. They don't get about this whole thing. How do you psychologically condition the person you're negotiating with or the nation you're negotiating with to get to where you want to go in the negotiation? And military force is the last thing you want to do because it creates its own set of problems every time you do it. All right. You have to be able to use it. You have to be willing to use it. He does not back away from that. That's what he means by peace through strength. But it's something that most people who are conditioned by our media, which has almost become pacifist in its relationship to the world and isolationist, you don't get in there and actually fight. That's why when he stood up after he was almost assassinated and said, fight, 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 it struck people as such an iconic moment where it is just his very nature that he would actually do that and say that at that particular moment in time. So, you know, what I think he's looking at is yes, whoever shows up now to open the Strait of Hormuz, if we have to do that as a military operation, we're going to basically treat in a very good fashion. Whoever doesn't show up, you're off the chessboard, all right? We're no longer dealing with you, and Europe right now is failing anyway, so you don't count. Our national security strategy already says that the people we want to have alliances with are primarily in this hemisphere. The way he's laying out the future of defense policy is how do we actually be able to defend our own hemisphere, get out of all these other countries, which are millions and millions of miles away and cost a whole hell of a lot of money and don't do a whole lot for us. And secondly, the area of the world which is actually growing at this point is, and this will surprise many people, Africa and Asia. That's where Pacific power primarily, that's where we want to basically go. We want to go where there's youth. We want to go where there's productivity, and that's who we want to trade with. And unless Europe actually, changes, 100% from its recent trajectory, the World Economic Forum eating bugs, thinking we should all go back to some kind of feudal relationship, you're out of the picture, you're off the chessboard. And that's the huge thing which is going on underneath all of this.
Thank you very much, Barbara. And thank you, Random Chance, for joining us. Please make sure you're subscribed to the channel. We do 3 political updates a week, plus this live show every Thursday. So please make sure you're subscribed to the channel. We have another question here. Let's Tom R. Candace Owen married to George Farmer, directly connected to the Lords of London.
Well, a number of people have raised this. I think, these things are important to take into account. But, as Barbara and I know, having been at this question of serious strategic analysis for a whole lot of decades, you don't really do it from the standpoint of connectos. It's not really based on the knee bone connected to the thigh bone, et cetera, et cetera. Those often will point you in the right direction. But what you really have to look at in terms of how institutions or individuals are operating and sometimes just plain controlled or deployed is, what is the shape of their underlying ideology? And what is their intention? I mean, perhaps with people like Candace and with Tucker, I was at an event the other night. Someone said, they ought to publish their income tax returns so that we just see who's paying for them. Now, that's probably a much more interesting connecto, honestly, than who people are married to, which doesn't mean it's not irrelevant. It doesn't mean someone's not traveling in a particular kind of layer. But as I say, it can't just sort of be, well, this is connected to this, and therefore that means that. The question of intelligence, the question of understanding, is a verbal question. It's not nouns. It's not this noun means that noun. We all know that, with the concept of metaphor, a noun can mean one thing, and in a poem, it means something completely else. It's not fixed. The question of real intelligence is what is the nature of the fight between these two systems? One based on man in the image of the creator, and the other is that we're no better than an animal to be controlled and manipulated by our betters. That's where you start. And that frankly will get you a lot farther, because whatever the connecto ends up being, it's that question of how people think, how they've been trained to think, how they've been manipulated to think, how they've been frightened into thinking. That's a lot of it with a lot of people. They just capitulate to this, again, they think the world is random. Therefore, it's the biggest, most powerful people in the world who will impose their order on this chaos and randomness, and then they capitulate to that in terms of their thinking. And the reason they're so easy to defeat, ultimately, if enough people figure this out, is that guess what? The universe isn't random. It's a beautiful, self-developing, continually creative symphony, really. And, the more that we penetrate what those beautiful self-developing laws are and recognize that we're a microcosm of it, the more influence we have on that. And that is demonstrated by the fact that right now on this planet, there are over 8 billion people. You couldn't have done that 10,000 years ago. What changed? We discovered various principles in the universe, and we improved our ability to exert dominion over it. So, especially in the world of social media, where so much of it is connectos that you got from some social media garbage can. And the connecto, again, may actually be a truthful connecto. But all I'm saying is that doesn't necessarily tell you what is driving a particular individual or an institution. And that's what we try and do here.
Thank you, Tom. Please make sure you're subscribed to our free newsletter. I run a daily newsletter for Promethean Action where I include the video reminders when we post a new video. Also, I send stuff from our wider Promethean network. We have some other channels. I send out content from our other channels, and also our most important articles. We have a network of authors. Every week or two, we'll publish an article from one of our authors that we think is relevant. So the link to get our free newsletter is in the description. It's completely free. Don't worry about giving a monthly donation if you can't. Just subscribe to the free newsletter and let us stay in contact with you. I have David himself, first time to attend live. We follow Promethean channels avidly. We love to learn the history you open our eyes to. David, thank you for joining us. Love to have you here. Again, please make sure subscribe to the channel, and we do have a free newsletter. The link is in the description. Paul, thank you for joining us every week. Pam, happy Thursday. Pam from Texas. I'm trusting President Trump, voted for him all 3 times. And we get to vote for him in spirit this November. Even though he's not going to be on the ballot, we have to realize that what we're doing in this November is actually re-voting for Trump. So don't forget that. You're going to vote for him a 4th time. Softail, rock stars, please make sure you're subscribed. You're a rock star too for being here and joining us. I hope to see you more often in the future. Make sure you get our free newsletter. Thank you very much, KLMN. Engineer and Promethean Action fan here from across the pond. Levels of UK anti-Trump propaganda is off the charts. And that's saying something. COL is very rattled. Promethean Action is my go-to as you get it. Ditched MSM a long time ago. Also, listen to Bach. Yes, I agree. Actually, on the last point, I grew up playing classical music, and I know that for anyone, really, if you really want to understand music more and get a better understanding, you have to study Bach's Well-Tempered Clavier, both books. That set of compositions really is the basis for all modern music. It truly is. Everything that came after that stood in the footsteps of that. So I agree. But your thoughts, Barbara and Susan, on this comment?
Well, I think we covered it in some respects. The level of propaganda is huge, and it's because the City of London, I saw some comments, don't know what to call it. You know, is it UK? Is it Britain? Is it England? Is it Scotland? What is it? It is the Commonwealth, and it is the City of London banking apparatus. You know, for those who don't know, the City of London is this little 1-mile strip in London proper, which has existed for ages, is separate and very important in that it manages the Queen's or King's money. And it actually runs how the British Empire and the Commonwealth function from the standpoint of finance in the world. And, you know, we've covered it many times, but ever since 1971, when Richard Nixon, at the behest of the British, actually blew up the Bretton Woods monetary system, which was very stable, the City of London has been the center of world finance, the casino economy. You know, and with it came a whole lot of ideologies, invented ideologies like zero growth, zero population growth. The world has too many people. You know, we're all going to be killed by a climate apocalypse unless we actually stop all industrial and scientific progress right now. Let's go back to feudalism. That's actually part and parcel of what Tucker Carlson is preaching right now, if you listen to him carefully. You know, what his ideal is small communitarian communities where you go out and, you know, hunt your own food and, you know, do all the right stuff in terms of keeping your body healthy. But you don't intervene anywhere in the world, and you don't exercise American power. And it really is essential that we exercise American power for our own survival. We live in a world which you cannot be an isolationist and actually survive at this point. We've got to exit from this globalist economy, build something completely different. And that's what Trump is doing.
Thank you very much, Barbara. And I want to give one more quick shout out, and then I have more super chats, guys. I want to get to some questions from our email newsletter. So I want to give a quick shout out to James. Thank you very much for joining us from up north. We have so many supporters from Canada and from Australia. We should get to some of those questions later. So thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate the support. All right, so the questions now are coming from our email newsletter subscribers. Every week, I put links in the email newsletter where I have a form where you could submit your questions. We can't get to everyone. We usually get over 100, but we get questions that come in very similar themes. So if you don't see your exact question asked, I'm very sorry, but please try to see your question in some of the other ones. Susan and I do review every single question. Okay, so the first one here is from Dr. Amy. If Trump states his goal is to stop Iran from having nuclear weapons, he never says one of the goals is to end the extremist religious dictatorship that suppresses women and human rights. I, along with Iranian citizens, want him to finish what he began. He needs to kill or incapacitate every last religious leader in the Iranian government. If not, human rights abuses will continue. What is your analysis of Trump's plan and actions regarding this? And number two, a 30-year special forces vet told me the job cannot be finished without boots on the ground. He is opposed to Trump's war on Iran and thinks Trump has painted himself into a corner and can't win. What is your opinion about this position that boots on the ground are needed to finish off the Islamic dictatorship? Thank you, Amy, Dr. Amy, for joining us, and thank you for sending this question.
I guess I'm getting the start on this one. You know, I think it is highly probable that the goal of suppressing nuclear weapons in Iran will be settled by a treaty. I think that's a very realistic outcome of this entire thing, and is the main thing we're trying to do. We're also trying to decimate Iran's military capacities. Now, that can all be accomplished not by boots on the ground, but by a bombing campaign, which is using, you know, really, really, really advanced military tools at this point, which the United States has. Now, with respect to destroying every last religious leader in Iran, I think you're kind of, you know, off a little bit here. I mean, there's a New York Times article which came out this week, you know, in which they were intending to show that they got great leaking of all the ways, the reasons that Trump took us to war, and detailed accounts of the deliberations for the war that actually took place in the Situation Room. I sort of think that article was leaked by the Trump administration. But the point is that even while they were trying to show, oh, everybody disagreed with the president's assessments, what you're actually looking at, if you're looking at that article, and I think I gave Adam the link, you can put it somewhere in the description of this at a certain point, you're actually looking at a deliberation going on over the course of weeks in which every aspect of this operation was discussed, thought through, and several alternative plans were set up by the military and others, okay? It is the complete counter-argument to what the New York Times otherwise publishes every single day. This is complete chaos. The president never had a plan. He doesn't have a plan, and Iran is winning. How is Iran winning? It only is winning if it survives. Most importantly, in that article is a discussion of Netanyahu and Israel's planning or their idea about the war, which was put before the president by Netanyahu. First and foremost, the article concludes that Trump intended to do this regardless of whether Israel suggested it or not. And that is true if you look at his history. He has always said Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. He was talking about taking Karg Island 16 years ago. Why? Because he recognized economically it is a choke point for the world. It is an economic choke point for the world. Why is it a choke point? Because we haven't thought through an advanced economy. An advanced economy would immediately not be dependent on one place to get 20% of the world's order to the market. It would have all sorts of alternative routes because sovereign nations would be developing their own access to the fuels which fuel an economy. Just think about that. The choices of the world has made since the end of World War II, which makes something like this a choke point for 20% of the world's energy. That is complete lack of planning. That's complete globalization and its actual impact on the entire world. That's not diversifying your energy resources and how they get to market. So what's said in this article is basically the head of the CIA, John Radcliffe, told the president that Israel's idea that we could have regime change in Iran, that we could actually overthrow, as your question suggests, the entirety of the present leadership in Iran. He basically said that's nonsense. We can't do it. Nobody could do that. That's farcical, were his words. Marco Rubio then added, otherwise it's bullshit. That that view of Israel is bullshit. Raising Cain, General Cain said, this is typical of the Israelis. They always try to oversell us on all these things. We know that. The reason is they can't do these operations without us, and that's why they oversell things. All right. So that was all out there and discussed thoroughly before the operation commenced. The president made the ultimate decision. Now, regarding boots on the ground and the job can't be finished with the boots on the ground, that's something that Chatham House put out there in the narrative machine at the very beginning of this conflict. You can't do any of this without actually creating, some kind of expeditionary force to go in and take over the government. Trump does not want to do that. Israel suggested that the Shah's son could come in and take over. That sort of tells you something about the movement behind this idea, which is very much out there in the narrative machine. That's what needs to happen. The Shah's son needs to come in and take over the government. Well, in Trump's view and in the deliberations view, that's what we have typically done in all of these forever wars which have failed in the past. We actually replaced one tyrant with another puppet who didn't have support within the population. What Trump is proposing is something far more daring, far more difficult, which is from the present Iranian population and the people who win out in this gigantic factional battle which is taking place, can we find someone who is capable of actually leading a very fractured nation? And that's the only way it's going to work. It's not going to work by us going in there and crushing them and taking over the government. That doesn't work. We proved that extensively in Iraq. In a war, in a guerrilla war and an insurgency, that's the last thing you want to do, because essentially you've created the basis for, people fighting you forever. It has to come from within the Iranian population somehow. And a lot of the pressure we're putting on this and putting on China and putting on Russia and putting on other people who have major inputs into this population is come to the peace table, actually figure out how you're going to relate to the new economy of the Middle East, which the Board of Peace is setting up, i.e. not an economy which is in a forever religious war between Israel and the Arab populations, which is how the British set it up, but nation states developing and getting out of being simply oil economies which export fuel, oil and gas economies in certain cases, and becoming, full set industrial economies where the people actually profit. And that's the big carrot which the administration is holding out to the Iranian population at this point. It's very interesting when you actually look at, I asked the question to, AI, give me a breakdown of who graduates the most scientists and engineers in the Middle East, in the entire area. And you'd think Saudi Arabia, all these other nations, no, it's Iran. The problem is that because of the way the religious operation works, all of those people end up emigrating. Most of them are women, which again kind of cuts against the narrative, that is out there, and they immigrate to the United States or somewhere else where they can actually apply their skills, because at every point where they seek to advance, except for military purposes, it's a closed economy to them. It's very similar in some respects to the old Soviet Union when you actually look at the mix of the economic relationship. So that's a very long answer to your question. And no, Trump hasn't painted himself into a corner. He's actually trying to bring the board of peace into realization. And it can't realize itself. You can't have the rebuilding of Gaza. You can't have the diversification of the Gulf economies. You can't have, the area prospering without war, without getting rid of the terrorist components here.
Thank you, Barbara. Plenty more questions about Iran.
Yeah, there was a whole clump of them about the IRGC, which kind of play off of this.
Okay, yeah, we can take those next. So let me put up these two about the IRGC and negotiating with them. Do you think the Trump administration really believes they can negotiate with anyone remotely associated with the IRGC regime? That's like saying instead of dealing with the hardline Islamic jihadist terrorist, we're going to negotiate with the moderate Islamic terrorist jihadist. It's the same thing. Thank you, Ricardo. And this second one here. I believe that the leaders now are just the terrorist group. They hide and attack at will with no coordination. Also, I still believe that possibly China has given Iran a small nuclear device to be used on USA soil. Your thoughts? Let me just say something real quick, Harry. I remember seeing a storyline, I think it was yesterday, where Trump said that now any country that's supplying, that's working with Iran is now going to be sanctioned on everything, no exceptions. So I really don't okay, Barbara and Susan, your thoughts on these last two questions about the IRGC. Is this the same? Aren't we just negotiating with hardliners, even if it's just the moderates?
Well, look, I think people have to take a step back, because the first thing that you have to do is recognize the IRGC, this regime of the mullahs, is not indigenous to Iran. It is created by the nihilist empire for the purpose of using the choke point of the strait and this regime for their imperial purposes. So that's how you have to think about this, not from the eye level of, in terms of what is on the ground in that country. Now, that being said, I think the president is very clear that that is the world that he is operating in. Everything he has done prior to this, in terms of taking pieces off the chessboard of this British imperial globalist system and moving them into a new domain where, his world is one of sovereign nations working with each other. The word is now being used quite a bit, on a transactional basis. You're a nation, I'm a nation. Let's figure out where we can do business. Let's work out our differences otherwise, but not as pawns on the rules-based chessboard. So that is how he is approaching the situation in Iran. And, I think he recognizes that it's clearly there's going to be a factional situation. And clearly there are people who, as I said before, have gone along with this nihilist regime because they felt they had no choice. And now that he is creating different options, I think which I think is what we're seeing actually happen, as J.D. Vance said, there are people who appear to be negotiating in good faith, and we're going to try and strengthen that. Because again, Barbara said it, we've said it before, you can't pull off the John Bolton regime change. Kill them all, arrest them all, create complete chaos in the country, and I guarantee you, the globalist system is going to move in with some other kind of operation and continue to keep that region of the world as a cockpit for war. What the president is trying to do is create a situation where he weakens the true hardliners, the ones who are ideologically, politically, and maybe financially hot-wired into the British Empire's intention to impose a nihilist system on the world. He wants to isolate or destroy, and I think we've probably destroyed a whole lot of those in the course of the military side and the conduct of this war, dry up the support layers for them as well. Some interesting things are happening, which people aren't noticing. The Lebanese government a couple of weeks ago told Hezbollah to get the hell out of the country. Now, that doesn't mean they're necessarily doing it, but the president has created a new geometry where the government of Lebanon can now stand up and say, no, we don't want you here. Whereas previously they couldn't do that because the power configuration with Iran still intact, pretty much calling the shots, meant they would have paid a terrible price from the Iranian government if they had done something like that. So people just can't look at this at eye level and basically say, that again, it comes back to what I say in terms of nouns. Don't look at the situation from the standpoint of some static fixed noun. The president is actually changing the world strategic configuration. That then changes the situation inside that country. Whether he's changing it with military action and making clear we will use our military as needed to win a just war against evil. And the evil didn't start with the IRGC. It started back in the mists of time when you had a grouping of the human race which considered themselves to be the oligarchs, to be the superior beasts over the rest of us. This is an extension of that fight. And the only way you can fight it and win it is if you understand that and then give a space where the forces of civilization, which clearly exist inside that country, in terms of the population, and I would suspect people who are in positions of some kind of power, but who have had to accommodate to this nihilist formation in the world. The president is creating the space for other forces to step forward. And that is going to be so critical if you're going to actually have the evolution of a stable government in this country. We've said it before, I don't need to belabor it. Look at Venezuela. We didn't tear, and now Venezuela is not as problematic, frankly, on the scale of danger and evil in the world as Iran. But nonetheless, the principle remains. Allow the nation to free itself from the imperial overlord.
I want to say, yes, I know there's trolls in the chat. I only police it if it starts getting really bad or if people start like massively spamming. Just everyone, there's always going to be troublemakers in the chat. Just please try to ignore them. Thank you. All right, Barbara, any thoughts on this second thing, even just more broadly, the fact that China and Russia supporting Iran, is there any truth to that angle at all, putting aside the potential for a nuclear device?
Well, I think you've got to look at what are the interests operating here. Obviously, Putin is enjoying the high price of oil. Xi Jinping, not so much, in terms of actually fueling China, which is having its own economic difficulties at this point. It's not really, China is very lukewarm about committing itself to any one of these forms of battles. It basically sees itself as, having a set strategy in terms of how it intends to actually, paper over the world, which is largely non-military. All right, it's all about they hope to beat us in technology. They hope to beat us in space. They hope to beat us in nuclear power and fusion power. And if they do all of that, they know that they'll become the dominant nation in the world without a fight. I mean, you got to read Sun Tzu when you actually think about China. So I don't think they would give Iran a nuclear device to be used against the United States. They're too dependent on us right now. What they're thinking about is preserving their channels to Iran and all the other nations they're tied up in, including a large amount of nations in Latin America. And we have, really quite a joint history with China, which has largely been screwed up in the recent period. But, Sun Yat-sen, as I keep emphasizing, was an American system economist. And, basically that kind of shared history is what Trump always likes to take a look at, figure out, and exploit with a country. That's why he has such a good relationship, which he emphasizes over and over and over again with Xi Jinping, despite Steve Bannon and everybody else who insists, we all hate the war in Ukraine, not because it's killing millions of people, but because it's diverting from the actual enemy, which is China. And the idea that you always have to have an enemy to define yourself in the world comes from a Nazi theorist by the name of Carl Schmitt. But it somehow has become central to the way British imperial thinkers think about the entire world framework. That's not the way that Trump thinks about things, and that's not the way the world actually works. I just don't, I think China is playing a very positive role here. I think their interest is, hey, I don't really want to, I'm dependent on Iran for 20%, 20% of the world's oil goes through that strait, and a large percentage of it goes to China. And while they have saluted the globalists in terms of the WEF, solar power and everything else they're profiting from enormously, they still need oil, gas, coal, and nuclear to, they know that, to actually raise their economy to the next level. And they're trying to beat us around both space and fusion power, which, quite frankly, the people who think that the moon, thing isn't happening now and didn't happen before, if they keep believing that and we don't pursue the space program, they're going to have a very rude awakening when, their children are learning Chinese. So that's how I would just put that.
I would just add one other thing for people to keep note of, which is sort of lost in, obviously, the big headlines about the Middle East. But the head of Taiwan is in China right now on what she calls a mission of peace. So, where that ends up, I don't know, but that's certainly an anomaly in a world in which China is our remaining, super enemy.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Barbara. All right, what I'm going to do next is we're going to go through some super chats kind of quickly, and then we're going to get to some domestic issues. So let me say thank you to Daisy Coca. Why can't Trump get control of the mainstream media? It's fake news. It's too effective towards useful idiots. There's a lot to unpack in this question. I think, one of the reasons is that technically we have a free press, right? We're supposed to have a press that's controlled by private interests, right? By the private markets. And somehow we ended up in this situation. And also fake news is too effective towards useful idiots. Well, that says more about people than it does the fake news, I think. Barbara and Susan, your quick thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think, Adam, that's the point. The real challenge that we face as we get into the next discussion on the midterms and domestic policies and so on is, how do you awaken in enough of our fellow citizens the desire to be truth seekers as opposed to opinion consumers? That's the question. I mean, we're not going to police the media. There's always going to be media that disagree with you. I mean, admittedly, the mainstream media is an abomination at this point. But I think what's most important is a lot of people have already figured that out on their own. Well, with the help of Donald Trump, obviously, and the way this fight has evolved over the past 10 or so years. Barbara and Adam and I have been around before Donald Trump. There was a period of time when the kind of discussions that are happening right now about globalism, about, versus sovereignty, about the British Empire, about all of these things those were discussions that were had within, I'd say, about 1% to 2%, maybe 5%, if you want to be generous, of the population. This is now a much more vibrant, widespread topic, certainly among the MAGA base, which is tens of millions of people, right? That didn't happen because we shut down mainstream media and we just started feeding them a different story. That happened because tens of millions of people have figured out for themselves that they have to have some kind of principled basis for making actual judgments, that they're not just going to be consumers. And look, a lot of people have gone from, deciding not to consume CNN, and then for a long time they consumed Fox. And then they got a little bit smarter and they said, oh, I don't even want to consume Fox anymore. Because, while there might be some, decent coverage here and there, there's still something wrong with their methodology. And then a lot of them, prior to Tucker going off the deep end, said, all right, well, now I'm going to consume Tucker, like when he left Fox. And in the year running up to the 2024 election, no one was going to gainsay that he didn't play an important role in, airing things that other people wouldn't air. But then people look at, him sort of falling off, the cliff, and they're saying, well, I'm not going to consume Tucker any longer. But all of that was based on people saying, I'm going to look for some kind of methodology where I can make some determinations based on principles that I have decided are the truthful principles, where I can decide, what is closer to the truth. So that I don't care about who controls the media. What I care about is creating a class of citizens who are embarked on this wonderful journey as citizens to constantly try and figure the truth out for themselves.
Thank you, Susan. And thank you, Daisy. Please make sure you're subscribed to the channel here. I'm going to go through a few more of these because we got a burst after I said we're going to take more of these. I truly believe the promise of America is still within our reach. After all, we have the people on our side, thanks to God. Thank you, Lee Walden. Couldn't agree more. Please make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Happy to have you here. Grunt, thank you for joining us again every week. Good morning, my beautiful ladies. And where is the shirt with Adam either in a Lincoln stovetop or hat or Washington wig? Go Promethean, the truth is here. Thank you, Grunt. I'm working on more merch. I do want to do one for Lincoln too, for my America 250. I want to do more than just the founding fathers. So I'll keep your shirt design in mind. Thank you for joining us every week. Boots Omega, how is London connected to the Vatican? Ladies, any thoughts on this one real quick?
Well, that's a really difficult question to get into. I thought it was very interesting, to be blunt, that the president, when everybody was accusing him of, basically committing blasphemy on Easter by saying praise be to Allah, he also posted basically a huge acknowledgement and memory for Pope John Paul II. And that's very important because Catholic social teaching, as exemplified by John Paul II, is a very important component of how this administration is actually thinking in the background about the world. And that is very anti-London. Now, that doesn't mean that if you look at the history of Christianity and you look at how the Pope has actually functioned at various points as actually an instrument of empire. And Bob Ingram just wrote a whole book about early Christianity and empire, which I think we might have posted on our website. I don't know if we do or not in the toolbox. But it gives you, how religion actually becomes distorted when they're able to capture a pope. And the last two popes, quite frankly, have been captured in many respects with British ideology rather than actual Catholic social teaching, as exemplified by, the resignation of Cardinal Ratzinger, for example. That's something that, had I all the time in the world, I would really look into as to what really happened there. And what was that all about? Because he most certainly was the theoretician for Pope John Paul II, and the resurrection of that entire history of very, if you will, Platonic Catholic social doctrine. So, the connection is not really, as Susan said, in connect those. You have to look at what's being said, and you have to basically say, okay, what's fundamental about what's being said? What does it say about human beings? Does it say that we're created in the image of the Creator and tasked in our lifetimes with perfecting His creation? That's fundamentally the heart of Christianity, and that's the heart of the Catholic social teaching that I'm talking about. Or does it say that we're beasts who can only react to the world from the standpoint of sense perceptions, are doomed to actually kill one another as beasts do, survival of the fittest and all of that. And therefore we need to be policed endlessly by an oligarchy which controls us. That's at the heart of the City of London's social teaching. The kind of Vatican teaching which says that man is fallen and can never come back from that dramatic fall. So religion is not something we really get into in depth on these shows, but the question was asked, and I think it's important because this particular pope is getting very close to calling for the 25th Amendment in the United States. He has no business actually doing that, even if he is an American or claims to be from Chicago.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Boots Omega, for joining us. James, the big question is, who's going to be next after Trump? And will they go back to business as usual? I think that's what we're trying to do here, is to prevent that going back to business as usual.
Well, I was going to say that's up to you, but I see that you're Canadian. So I can't exactly put the onus on you per se, because you can, I'm sure, help us, spiritually, but it's really up to the American people. And it gets back to what I said about the previous question in terms of mainstream media. Donald Trump, we're at a moment in history where it demanded a unique, singular historical figure like Donald Trump. We would not have survived, I don't believe, if he had not come back into office in 2024. He clearly is developing a deep bench. I am constantly, awestruck in a certain sense by the way that this cabinet operates in unity. I think it's extremely impressive how many people from a younger generation he has put in extremely important positions of power, like J.D. Vance, like Marco Rubio, like Pete Hegseth, other people. He is developing another level of leadership. Which one of them emerges in terms of 2028? I think it's a premature question. J.D. Vance says it's a premature question. He says, my job right now is to act on behalf of the American people and make sure that this continues. Your question is going to be answered, that we'll have a much more definitive answer when we see the results of the midterm election. That is not something we are waiting on. That is something that we are directly intervening in. So if you were in the United States, I would say it's up to you. Appreciate your question, but the answer really is up to our fellow Americans.
Thank you, Susan. And let me take this other one from another friend up north. How will Trump deal with China captured Canada? He seems to be on a business level with Carney and Brookfield. Will a regime change be on the table for Canada?
Let's hope so. Basically, the premise of your question is wrong. Okay. Basically, Mark Carney is the leading, representative figure for the British imperial system right now. He is working to try and come up with what he calls a third way. with Macron of France. That is actual strategic fact. And what they think they're going to do is unite all of what he calls the middle tier nations in the world against the United States and China, which is why I'm saying your question is a little bit falsely premised. The idea that they have is there's these two big giants here who in one way or another are trampling over everyone, and we've got to stop them, and we've got to save the old globalist system. In my Monday brief, I actually quoted from Macron's statement about that in South Korea this week. That's what he's saying. That's what Carney is saying. That's what the City of London sees as its pathway at this point to bring globalization back to the fore when it has demonstrated itself to be a completely, failed system and a completely not just failed, but evil and satanic system. So that's how I'd answer your question. Does Trump really like Carney and Brookfield? He's dealing with them from the standpoint of, again, trade between the United States and Canada. He has at various points actually encouraged the separatist type of movement in Alberta, which I understand has now got enough, momentum behind it in terms of the number of people who support it to put something on the ballot. That type of stuff, I think, is very, very useful. But, the Canadians have to look at the United States as a model, quite frankly, because they're stuck with the British system as a model. And they've got to really think through how do we replicate the success of the United States in Canadian terms. And that's really at the heart of any attempt at what one might call regime change or revolution. You've got to start with the constitution of your country. What do you want your country to actually be? And you've got to organize, just like our founders did, a consensus and agreement around those principles. All right. And that's what we did, which made our, Constitution successful, still surviving, after 250 years. We got popular consent to principles, which we all came to agree about after enormous fights about what they would be, and the British success, and frankly, almost totally blanking out that history for entire generations, which we've got to somehow, this 250th anniversary, inject right back into the population who have learned a completely false history about the United States.
Well, you're muted, Adam.
I reversed myself there. Thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Will, for the super chat and for joining us today. I want to give one more quick shout out. I want to say, Anthony, PGK Dan, none your business. I do have your questions queued up here. I want to get to them. Please just give me a little bit longer. I'm going to switch back to our newsletter questions really quick, and then I'll get to your super chats. Collier, spreading the word about Promethean action to all. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. We have so many people out there clipping our videos, putting them out to different places. It's really helping us gain massive exposure. Thank you to us all. Please, if you've been watching and you're not yet already on our newsletter, I mentioned this before, we have a free newsletter. The link is in the description. Don't worry about contributing if you can't afford it. Our free newsletter will give you 90% of the content. And for those that are paying, I have new exclusive content should be coming out next week. So thank you, everyone who is on our newsletter, and thank you to all of our paying subscribers too. And thank you, Collier. All right, so the next questions here are going to be on the elections and upcoming midterms. And I think these questions really represent a lot of what bounces around in people's minds. The propaganda machine has turned most Americans against Trump. I can't even talk to reasonable people about the administration's goals anymore. I can't even talk to my family about politics of any kind. You're not alone. I want you to say, you're not alone in that. Your team speaks of everyone living and thinking in the old world, while perception is reality. As long as the Democrats and the globalists have the majority of Americans hating Trump, we're still in the old world. Job reports don't mean anything if nobody hears about it. I'm losing faith in the American people. Our politicians have been lying for so long, it's impossible to recognize the truth. I believe your message, but it's a little too late. The number of people subscribed and viewing are not enough to change the midterms. Let's face it, the Marxists won the education war. The country has 3 generations of uneducated college graduates that adore British imperialism and despise American culture. Marxists control the levers of power. Most of our population is brainwashed. We are doomed. Why bother with the midterms if they can't even pass the Save America Act? If Trump doesn't follow through on his deadline promises and give Iran another 2 weeks, that's a policy failure. Perception is reality. We are still in the old world. Okay, I don't know. Okay, next one here. Concerns. And so first off, thank you, Eric. Second one is from Jay. Concerns. With the increased cost of blood and treasure, planes shot down, pilots lost in Iran, we, MAGA and Trump, food and energy inflation, the negative optics of ICE, Scottish rulings on tariffs, what winning message will the Republicans have in the midterms? We need the broad base that voted for Trump in 2024. Thank you, Jay, for your comments and observations. And finally, we're going to do this one, heard from Bob. With the approaching midterm elections, is the playing field set? Are all the candidates known, or are we waiting for the local primaries for the final candidates to be determined? If known, which seats seem to be the most vulnerable? How does the war in Iran affect certain candidates? How can we help them? Thank you, Bob, for your question.
All right. Well, there's a lot there. Just on this last one, quickly, no, the field is not yet set. There are still many, many, many primaries in front of us. The latest big ones are August. I know I'm in Michigan. We have an early August primary. There might even be some that go as far as September, but I'm not sure about that. So it's not really set. But I think the underlying premise in all of those, although the question before, Adam, flip back to the previous one. I think, yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head in terms of what is the winning message that Republicans will have in the midterm, because we need the broad base that voted for Trump in 2024. And that begins to get close to how people have to think about the midterms. You know, the previous question from the fellow who thinks that we've lost and you can't talk to anybody, it comes from fighting on the enemy's territory. The real question which is being posed here, and I think Jay gets closest to it in terms of this, is how do we shift the battle onto our territory, which is the winning territory? Now, I want to describe something that's happened to me over the course of the last 2 evenings, where I went to events. One was a Michigan Republican gubernatorial candidate, and another was a Michigan Republican senatorial candidate. I'm not going to give the names for a couple of reasons. Number one, I'm a vice chair of the Michigan Republican Party, and I can't be seen as endorsing anybody. And I'm afraid that if I brought up these people's names, people might take it as an endorsement. But second, it's not about the particular individuals per se. Now, I'm going to bring this up, but first I'm going to back up to the 2022 midterm elections here in Michigan, because this is a very good case study, which were a complete and utter and total disaster. We lost the governor's race. We lost the attorney general's race, the secretary of state race. We lost the Michigan Senate, and we lost the Michigan House. And, you know, we had two years of unrelenting insanity. Why did we lose? We had a decent gubernatorial candidate. It was a woman who grew up running her father's steel plant, you know, so she knew what the real issues were. And when she had a chance to talk, she could talk about them quite competently. But the enemy completely controlled the agenda and the territory. It was about abortion. It was about the social hot issues. It was about all of that kind of stuff. And we got completely wiped out. Now we were busy in that, constantly saying, change the agenda, talk about the economy, talk about manufacturing, remind people here in Michigan what life was like when one income could raise a family, because there were plenty of blue-collar manufacturing industrial jobs. Remind them what it was like when they actually had control over their living circumstances. They made enough money to take care of their families. They could confidently think their kids would have a better life than they would, because we had this robust manufacturing base. We got nowhere in terms of making that the agenda. Now, why do I say that? Because we, with a lot of help from Donald Trump, have started to change the actual agenda in the discussion here. You're not going to see it in the media. You're not going to see it if you have a debate with your second cousin about politics. What is happening is that there is a very important discussion beginning to emerge in this campaign, certainly here in Michigan. And it's, again, because we have chosen to magnify what Donald Trump is doing with his American system economics. The events that I were at were dominated, and one of them was sponsored by an organization that we don't like, and I'm not going to give them any publicity. But these events were dominated by very real, important discussions of the economy, education, and energy, where people were talking about the fundamentals of the importance of a manufacturing economy, of the kind of jobs that a skilled CNC-trained machinist can get right now, where you can make between $150,000 and $300,000 a year income, being an advanced, skilled, machinist who's using advanced computers, using new AI technologies. But they also talked about the problem of an abysmal education system where we're graduating. A majority of our students here in Michigan can't read at an 8th grade level. Many of them can't even read at a 4th grade level. Don't know how to use a tape measure. One of the candidates brought up the fact that he was talking to people in machine tool plants. In terms of their entry questionnaires, they've stopped asking people questions which involve being able to use a tape measure, because people don't know how to use one, because they think everything can, the answer to everything can come from this and so on. These were substantive discussions, which were right out of our playbook. And I walked out of both of these events actually happy, because these discussions are starting to happen. They have to spread. This has to be the agenda. The real world of how do you exert dominion over nature through manufacturing, which then gives you the kind of workforce, society, culture, economic standard of living where your society works and where you are an active participant. Now, toward that end, Adam, if we could share the slideshow. Here's your tool to do this. This is our midterm flyer, which will pop up on the screen in a minute, which addresses precisely these questions. And it is the conversation starter. What you want to talk to people about is not the latest hot button issue, or probably get in a debate over what Trump is doing in Iran. That's going to work itself through. And when it's over, people are going to see what the president did. But honestly, having a fight with somebody who's in some derangement syndrome world over this is going to get you nowhere. So why don't you start talking to them about, what do you think when we're graduating kids who can't even read at a 4th grade level? What kind of future do you think they have? And as this flyer says, the system is broken. And what this administration is trying to do is fix the system so that people can be active participants in their society, so they can be producers. And then the backside of this flyer is a snapshot of what the president had already done. and the link is, as Adam is pointing, at the bottom there. You can get you can order copies of this flyer. Again, this is as of now 4 months ago, and we're probably not going to keep updating this, because I think what we have here is an important snapshot of what it means to bring the nation back as a producer economy. So this is a tool that people need to use to help us spread and deepen a discussion, which I believe is going on now. Again, it's not what you're going to, whatever press coverage there was of these events is probably not going to tell you what I just told you. But these were very, very substantive events. Now, the one other thing, the other pitch I'm going to make is that people join our midterm boot camps. If you go to that same Promethean PAC website that hosts the flyer, you'll see up in the corner a midterm boot camp tab, and you can sign up to join with other activists around the United States, activists and candidates, every other Friday. The next one will be a week from Friday. We had one just last week, where we are brainstorming on how do we communicate these questions of Trump's new economy, even before people necessarily feel it in the pocketbook. I think some people will begin to feel it. Obviously, the war with Iran and the financier, the speculators boost in the price of oil, which has nothing to do with the fact that we're self-sufficient, but we still live in a world where the global elites set the price of oil. People are feeling it. That's having a kind of distorting effect. Hopefully this is going to be resolved over the course of the coming weeks. The price of oil comes down, and then we'll again be able to, I think, feel much more dramatically the impact of what the president's economic policies have actually done. But it gets back to getting out of the world of perception. I mean, one of the people did say perception is everything. Well, I got news for you folks. If perception is everything, our civilization dies. So, that's our challenge. Get people into the real world, get them to commit to being truth seekers. And I think the pathway to do this is this question of a producer society and a producer identity versus a consumer identity.
Thank you, Susan. So tomorrow we're not having a midterm boot camp session tomorrow, are we?
Right, it's a week from Friday.
All right, so a week from Friday, everyone, just some backstory on the midterm boot camp. Our midterm boot camp is we're helping people that want to begin to take their first steps. We have people from all parts of the process in our boot camps. People that have decades of experience like Barbara and Susan. Also people like Michael Steger. We have people that have run for office before at all layers of office.
And are running for office now.
We have people that realize now that they have to just they have to go beyond just having good opinions and really try to convince other people of ideas of the way the country has to move forward. So we're taking people from all walks of their political journey, and we're bringing them all together into this midterm boot camp process. We're inviting you to become a part of that. So you can go to PrometheanPAC.com. We should have links all over there. It's in our menu. You can sign up. You will get emails from Promethean PAC, which is different than Promethean Action. Promethean PAC is our political arm. So Promethean Action is an ideas organization. We can talk about ideas and policy, but we can't talk about candidates. We can't endorse candidates. Promethean PAC is the organization that allows us to take actual political action on behalf of candidates. So we're inviting everyone to become part of our midterm boot camp process. You can go to PrometheanPAC.com. It should be all over there. You can sign up and join our army of people that are now taking more political action across the country on behalf of MAGA's policies. So thank you, Susan.
I would just say that, the change in the discussion going on in Michigan here, where people are actually discussing Donald Trump's transformation, is a result of the broad influence that we and our fellow activists have had, in the state of Michigan. And we need more of that here. We need to deepen it here, and we need to spread it elsewhere, which is what that boot camp does.
Thank you. So I wanted to actually, this person sent in a question as you were talking a little bit back there, Susan, but I think this is also, because you dealt with a lot of negativity, I think this is probably a better way to look at it. If the situation stabilizes and energy prices drop, could that be the GOP lock in the midterm?
I don't think anybody should think there's a lock, right? But I think that will create the circumstances where it becomes much clearer how much of an economic transformation the president has actually made. And I think the fact that Trump is calling for a midterm convention, which will largely, it won't be nominating anybody because it's not a presidential year, but to have the Republican Party have a midterm convention, the date we're hearing is September, is because they are operating from the idea that the economy, people are going to start to see the dramatic impact of this change in the economy by the time we get there, and that this convention will be a celebration of that. And certainly, if this situation stabilizes and energy prices drop, we're going to see that happening sooner rather than later.
Thank you, Susan. So many super chats. I feel like I'm obliged to read every single one of these because you guys really power our organization. We're very grateful. Anthony, thank you so much. I recently visited Cape Verde, where I met a Portuguese tourist. Another incident, met a French via Switzerland, and realized propaganda travels. I've countered nothing but I've countered noting Trump's statements 20 years ago is Trump's policy. He truly loves America. Yes, I agree. It's funny to think too, Trump really started his political journey in the Democratic Party. And even back then, even when he was courting and flirting with the Democratic Party more, his policies still line up to what he's doing today. Maybe it's informed now because the world situation is different. We've gone through developments, but essentially he's still the same person that he was. Barbara or Susan, your thoughts on this before we move on?
No, I think that's true. And, he obviously was opposed from the very beginning. There were books written about him, which were highly, highly, highly defamatory way back when in New York City, when he was a New York City real estate developer. And it was because of the recognition by the elites that were running the country that he was outside the mainstream, that he was thinking differently, that he was, outside the box in everything he was talking about, that he was creative, which is the thing they actually hate the most in the guy. The fact that he doesn't conform to their fixed set of scenarios, values, etc. He's always looking for a creative solution. And that's the thing that the British Empire hates most in people. They will kill you for that. And so it is a very useful insight. He actually has not changed. He's always doing exactly that, looking for a solution, a creative solution, which has, nonlinear changes. And with respect to, the dynamics that we see going on now around narrative control, Elon Musk has a very good assessment of it. He says that physics is reality. Everything else is advisory. Because whether something works or not, when you're sending a rocket up,
it's the only thing that matters.
or not. If it doesn't work, then you got to go back to the drawing board and redo it. That is really at the center of what Trump is operating from, is that idea.
Thank you, Barbara. And thank you, Anthony, for joining us again. I hope you're getting our newsletter. Consider getting on our midterm boot camp. Even if you're just there to listen to what everyone else has to say, please consider joining us. Thank you. Catherine needs coffee. Thank you. Yes, we were talking about classical music earlier. I know this is almost an hour old. Thank you for waiting. Yes, we agree. Mozart and Beethoven too. My dad loves Schubert. That's my dad's thing. So yes, classical music all the way. Thank you so much. Here's one from our friends from Down Under. I theorize all universities are controlled by the City of London, controlled primarily by the House of Lords. Dissenters are canceled. Do you agree?
Yes. That's true. I mean, you know, if you actually trace the development, you'll find that Oxford and Cambridge have a whole lot more to do with education throughout the empire and in the United States than you'd ever think about.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul, from joining us from Upside Down World. Okay, I have another one from PGK Dan. Thank you for waiting. I know you sent this in like an hour ago. Good morning. President Trump is changing the world. I believe he has proven the evil of globalism and that NATO is the tool of empire. Oh, absolutely. And Barbara, Susan, any comments on this one?
Again, agree.
Thank you very much, PGK Dan, for joining us every week. And Nunya Business, thank you very much for the generous super chat, and also thank you for being patient. When will the central banking system be gone?
Well, I've answered a question like this quite a bit, in these discussions and some other interviews I on, and I'm actually adjusting my hypothesis at the moment. I had previously been saying that, what I see Donald Trump doing is beginning to build up parallel institutions, which somewhere down the road will replace the central banking system. The more I look at how fast he's moving strategically, recognizing that what he's doing, for example, by taking Iran, Lloyd's of London, all of the financial control that's baked in to this situation of the Iranian regime, their control over the Strait of Hormuz, the way Lloyd's of London operated on this. When I look at things which are not so well publicized, which is how Scott Bessent is moving to dry up illicit financial flows, whether it's to the IRGC, whether it's to the drug traffickers, all of these things are weakening the power of this City of London run central banking system, probably much more dramatically than most of us have an understanding of. So without trying to, put a time frame on it, I think the process that that this administration is engaged in terms of weakening this central banking system such that a world which is based on sovereign nations and national banks can emerge. I'm beginning to think it might emerge a little more quickly than I had previously thought.
Oh, absolutely. If there's been any time in history in like the last 100 years that we have a chance to radically organize the world's system of finances, it's really this upcoming period. So maybe we don't have a date, but this is certainly the best time in a century for sure. Thank you, Nunya Business. Please consider getting our free newsletter. Have you seen the Russian oil tanker that went through the English Channel with a Russian frigate export?
I hadn't.
No, I didn't. I know there's a trickle of traffic still going through the strait, but I didn't know that details. Thank you for joining us today, David. Please consider getting our free newsletter. Make sure you're a subscriber. Thank you for all your amazing work. Thank you, the man. Thank you for joining us. Please make sure you're subscribed. We are a reader and viewer funded operation, so we really appreciate the support. Josh, Josh Winston, thank you for joining us again. It seems from the New York Times article that JD and Rubio are closer in thinking and friendship than any of the external forces want to admit. I agree, most likely. What do you think was the purpose of that article, and who would have reported it?
Well, it was Trump's old friend, Maggie Haberman, who is like, basically a complete witch and hates him. And that's who the reporter was on the article. But the way he plays the game is really different than what many people think. He loves to seduce people with inside information. And they're sort of obligated, given their need to actually have some access to the White House, if they're going to survive as a publication, to sometimes print things which are fairly truthful. Now, she tried to basically turn it against Trump, etc., but the overall piece, if you read it closely, just demolishes all of the narratives out there that have been planted, including the alleged, rivalry between Rubio and JD for the presidency in 2028, which is, one of the things that's being played. Rubio is, neocon, former intelligence community guy, who's, much more on the side of the war than JD was. That's really quite not what's portrayed in the article at all. Rubio is in the pocket of Netanyahu, JD isn't. All of these various framings, that's not what's in the article. And you're very perceptive in actually noting both that thing, and there's other things in the article, including John Radcliffe, who has not been my favorite up to this point, but saying that the entire portrayal of regime change was bullshit, which is what he actually said, along with Marco. It's really quite interesting, because it means that the CIA is actually doing what the CIA should be doing, which is independent intelligence and analysis. So I thought the article was, that's why I think the article was kind of a plant, and not really what the New York Times wanted to say, and they tried to twist it in every way possible. But it was kind of, hey, no, this is completely different and much more close to what we believe is the actual way that these deliberations take place.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Josh, for joining us this week. I'm going to take one more thank you, and then we're going to jump back to some questions from our newsletter. Thank you for your explanation of what's happening in the world in concise and understandable format. Thank you very much for joining us. And honestly, the format is really coming from you guys. It's powered by your questions. We're just answering them. So thank you very much, Pazbilla, for joining us today. All right, so the next questions are going to be some interesting ones. I think you'll get a kick out of these next three. So this first one I think is a little bit misinformed, but I'm going to ask it anyway. LaRouche was an anti-Israel guy. How do you see Israel today? Thank you, Scott, for your question. But I can assure you he was not anti-Israel. Second question here. Does Israel continue alone, i.e., can we uncouple now? Thank you, Troy. And I'm going to take this third one here from John. Do you think the second airman in Iran, leaker, will be linked to Israel and become the pivot point Trump uses to rein in Bibi? What is next for Israel as anti-Israel sentiment, not anti-Semitic, grows in the U.S.? Thank you, John, for your question. Barbara and Susan.
Well, I'll take the last one first. The leaker has been identified and arrested, and it is not an Israeli link to Bibi. It is a person working out of Central Command down in Florida. They were arrested by the FBI yesterday. So that kind of goes out the window. But, overall, look, Israel, like Iran, is a very complicated society. Netanyahu has a vast amount of opposition in Israel. Israel is a keystone in terms of its ability to actually, its technological and scientific capacities to actually be the most useful point of the board of peace if it can go from being Sparta into being Athens. And I think that's how Lyndon LaRouche would have approached it. I have to say, again, to remind people, we have nothing to do with Helga Zepp-LaRouche or any of her organizations. But no, to show you how this kind of works, in the 70s, Mr. LaRouche was invited to the Middle East by people around Abba Eban, and also around Saddam Hussein and the Iraqi leadership. And the idea there, which he came back with, is what the Middle East actually needs to do to solve the problem is economic development, particularly around water, which remains the key physical economic constraint for the whole region. And, the people who like the Middle East to be in permanent warfare because it fills their coffers immediately attacked him, including the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith, because somebody was poaching their territory, so to speak. And that attack went on for years after that. So, the vital issue of this transformation of the Middle East, not as a control point for the economy through permanent wars, which the City of London profits off of, into a genuine area of development, is a huge strategic issue and a choke point for the entire world's economy, as everybody is learning right now in terms of this particular war. So I think that answers a lot of the questions. And I'm sorry, but a lot of it is anti-Semitic. What I see on the internet is not just anti-Israel. It really is the Jews, and are doing everything, and they somehow control the world. And that is kind of a trope. It's not true. And there is obviously genuine, when you oppose Israeli policy, you get called anti-Semitic. The people I have been associated with for 50 years opposed Israeli policy at various points, very, very heatedly, and
ADL.
got called anti-Semitic for it. But we were not anti-Israel per se. He saw it as a very valuable pivot in the Middle East if it could be extracted from this British setup permanent religious warfare dynamic, which is a very difficult thing to do. But that's what Trump is really trying to do.
Yeah, I want to add one other thing. I was on an interview the other week with my friend Crypto Rich and Tom Luongo, and I came up with this concept, which is that Bibi Netanyahu and the Iranian mullahs have a codependency. If you understand anything about, abusive relationships and so on, they literally need each other. Do a little thought experiment. Let's say you were in London in, 1943. Let's say you were pretty sophisticated. You had understood how, the British monarchy and others had helped set Adolf Hitler up. The whole question of Neville Chamberlain's appeasement, all of that kind of stuff. You can get into a lot more of that. Let's say you were sophisticated and you actually understood all of that. And you're you're a citizen of Britain, you're maybe living in London, you're being bombed and so on and so forth. You're not going to attack Winston Churchill until that war is over, until the immediate enemy at your gate, which was Nazi Germany, has actually been defeated. And that's what I mean by codependency. I don't think Bibi Netanyahu would have stayed in power as long as he had if you did not have Iran and the government of the mullahs as his, as an actual, which is an actual threat to the existence of Israel. And Netanyahu has milked that. He has used that. I think people know that prior to the October 7th attack, the Netanyahu government was much happier to work with Hamas than it was with the Palestinian Authority, because it wanted to keep things in a kind of state of perpetual tension so they could keep their militaristic Sparta-like, as Barbara puts it, kind of government in place. I think that as soon as this situation with Iran resolves successfully, you're going to start to see a fairly dramatic shift in the internal situation in Israel. Because once that external enemy is neutralized, Bibi Netanyahu is, not going to be able to play that game any longer. And the genuine opposition to the way that his government has conducted many things will finally have the room to do something. So, it's like this, it's ironically not unlike the situation inside Iran. You have those figures and forces and institutions that have been used and played by the empire in their great game. And then you have the legitimate interests of the people who live in those countries. And what the president is trying to do is create space for the latter.
Thank you, Susan. Just got a super chat in here. Israel bad is the key. The empire is key to the empire. Israel bad is the key to the empire. And anyone that does not see the benefit to the United States has their head in a dark place. So there is definitely this whole thing of Israel is bad is not, that's a thing that's being amplified by social media for sure. That's a line that's being amplified by social media. Thank you for joining us, Doug.
Which doesn't mean Bibi Netanyahu is good.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. Thank you. I want to get through some more super chats. Thank you, Sassy Trumper Fafo. Thank you all for bringing a wealth of information to us all. We ditched fake MSM years ago. Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us. Mark, you have the best paradigm for understanding the world so far, and I see Trump's actions largely through it. Thank you, Mark, for joining us. I hope you're getting our free newsletter. Love to have you aboard. Aline Kyle, with Tucker, could he have been deployed to bring out people against MAGA, bad actors, along with the issue and problem Zionists and Israel caused for the USA? I don't know. Maybe Barbara thinks that like Tucker's actually being like an active actor against MAGA.
I do. I wrote a post about that yesterday. I mean, there's a whole crew of them who are out there. I mean, he's gotten crazy. He had, all sorts of people on who are basically doing things like calling for the 25th Amendment. So that is not really even in the perspective of, questioning Trump. You can do that. I do that, all the time. I wake up in the morning, I say, what has he done today? And what's up? And how do I understand that? And what are people saying bad about it? What are people saying good about it? You got to go through that exercise in your head to actually understand things. That is very different from what's going on now with him. I don't know why it is going on. A lot of people have a lot of theories. They say he's been funded by Qatar. That's Laura Loomer. She's not reliable. They say, all sorts of other things. I frankly think he got completely flipped out when Charlie Kirk was assassinated. He was very close to Charlie Kirk. And what happens in that kind of situation is all of your past profiles come up because you're traumatized. And he had been being attacked. He's obviously a very fearful person, doesn't take being attacked very well by all sorts of people for being anti-Semitic. That kind of thing, is shocking to someone who isn't, like we were not when we were attacked as anti-Semitic. And it's a really nasty thing which sticks if it's being falsely put on you. But it almost seems like he's gone out to display it in a certain way as, I'm getting back at you. And, I'll actually entertain these sentiments by having the groypers on and everything else that he's done in the recent period. So hard to figure out what's happening, but it's not good. It's very bad.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you for clarifying that. I don't I don't really follow the whole Tucker online drama, so I didn't know it was getting that bad. Thank you very much, Eileen. Make sure you get our free newsletter. Some more here. Liquor. Some can doom and gloom, but how many countries can fight the cabal and go to the moon at the same time? I'm seeing a new age on, by the way. Relax, everyone. We have been here for 250 years, just starting our fantastic run. Thank you, Liquor. We couldn't agree more. Please make sure you subscribe to our channel. Cool Mom, again, thank you for joining us every week. We appreciate having you here. Kirk, thank you very much for joining us. Please make sure you subscribe to the channel, get our free newsletter. And again, as a Texan, our state is booming in every sector. Other states will see what's possible. Might take a little bit, but numbers do not lie. Yeah, man. I mean, think about Elon Musk basically uprooting his entire operations out of California and moving them to Texas. Texas, I know, in a lot of tech things, a lot of companies are moving there because Texas is a very favorable place to do business, including their energy policy. So thank you very much for joining us. I hope you make sure you get our free newsletter. I'd like to see you next week. And here's one, Web Diva. Thank you for your decades of research and sharing your knowledge with the world. I've learned so much, and it gives me hope and faith in Trump's plan. I have to say, if we weren't around, I don't know if I would. I think I'd be a lot more uncertain too. So thank you very much for joining us, Web Diva. We appreciate having you here. Doug says Donald Trump and Patton had many parallels, hated by the elites and loved by the Americans.
My friend Tom Luongo really agrees with you. He watches the Patton movie all the time.
Thank you, Doug, thank you for joining us. And another friend from Canada. Greetings from Canada, Calgary. Really love your work. Looking forward to help recognizing independence for the new Republic of Alberta this October 19th. God bless you and God bless America. Thank you, Vern. Maybe make sure you get our free email newsletter and if you have some plans about what you're doing in Canada, send us an email. Let us know what you're doing. Make sure you stay in contact with us because we like to know what's going on in other parts of the countries, especially other parts of the world, especially if there's going to be a real movement in Canada. We'd like to know about that. So thank you very much for your support. Love to have you here. And MB Nestor, thank you for the very generous super chat. Next time, send in a question. We'd love to answer one for you. And again, please, newsletter subscription, get our free newsletter, and make sure you're subscribed to our channel because our next video is going to be coming out on Saturday. Okay, Mislin, thank you for joining us again. I remember you from the last few weeks. We need to be specific with language when calling out a nation state. There are factions throughout government, institutions, corporations, and hawks. Yes, we understand. We understand. It's just figure of speech, but I wish you were a little more specific. We could address it more. But thank you for joining us every week here. Please make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you get our free newsletter. Oh yeah, thank you, Doug. Yes, I already took this one. Almost done here. Europe, Britain, and NATO are having another Chamberlain moment right now. Any comments on this one?
Well, I mean, I think the most ludicrous thing was Keir Starmer emerging yesterday and claiming that we had just had a victory, okay, in getting a peace negotiation, which is ludicrous. And that's a little bit different from Chamberlain. It's just outright trying to basically steal America's triumph in terms of getting this thing opened up and actually settled, which is where it's going to actually go. And the problem is that they're still committed to the old globalist order when an entirely new order is emerging. They even admit openly that the globalist order has failed, but they can't get their heads out of the past. And that's true of a lot of the commentators on the internet, what I call the isolationist peace faction, which keeps thinking of this in terms of the Iraq War, quite frankly. And they're like fighting the Iraq War all over again for a war which is entirely different in every respect, in terms of its intent, in terms of where it's going, in terms of what its ultimate result will be in terms of transforming the world economy.
Thank you, John. And this one, thank you, one of many 76. I don't know the details of this. Maybe you guys do. US debt clock has a lot of information being revealed about Fed future of the banking system. Do you have any insight between the Durst organization and Trump other than the prior feud?
I don't. We think we'll have to check it out.
Yes, I'm sorry, one of many. Thank you for joining us. Please make sure you're subscribed. Our next political update that we're going to do is on Saturday. So consider getting our free newsletter. We'll send you an email when we do our next YouTube video. So I'm sorry we can't answer your question, but we hope you would stay with us and continue to follow what we have to say. I want to give a quick shout out here to my merch. Let me put this on screen here. So if you didn't get one yet, I am going to be developing more products, but I have for America 250, I have 3 designs. I have this one with Alexander Hamilton. I also have a Benjamin Franklin one and a George Washington. I have, the link is pinned in the chat to the America 250 collection. And if you just go to our website, you'll see all the products. I have these here, both in shirts, and a George Washington one in shirts and in coffee cups. And if you go to the homepage, I have some other designs. My tribute to Albert Einstein, Going to the Stars. If you haven't seen this one, I haven't shown this one in a while. If you just use that link, you can go to the homepage and you'll see all the designs listed. Barbara and Susan, any closing comments for today's show?
I'm going to go back to Elon Musk. Stick with physics. Stay in the real world. Stay in the fight of civilization versus nihilism, which presumes that you are in the world where you believe there are knowable universal principles which actually move the universe and mankind forward. Just looking at the responses to my midweek update yesterday, I mean, it's clear that people are in a lot of turmoil. A lot of people are very upset. A lot of people are going a little bit nuts. But a lot of people are just genuinely upset because of the fact that we're in the middle of a war and the outcome is not yet settled. And all you can do under those circumstances is keep clear in terms of what your principles are and fight for the principles of civilization and be confident that ultimately, we hope in the short term or in our lifetimes, but ultimately, those principles are in keeping with the way the universe works and they will prevail.
Couldn't have said it better. I think that's a great close.
And I'd like to thank everyone in the chat. Thank you for putting up with the trolls that sometimes come in. Thank you for making me not have to moderate the whole thing the whole time. Thank you to everyone on x.com. Thank you for tuning in. We'll be back next Thursday at the same time, same format. We're taking questions. I had 40 more questions queued up here, but I think we really covered most of the topics that people raised this week. I'm sorry if we didn't get to your question. We did read them all. And please, everyone, make sure you get our free newsletter. The link is in the description. And we'll see you next week. Thanks, everyone.